You wake up one morning, and the man you've shared your entire life with is gone. No warning, no fight, just a note on the kitchen counter. Found someone younger. That was my reality. 6 months ago, 45 years of marriage, reduced to 23 words on a crumpled piece of paper. The coffee pot was still warm, his glasses were on the table, and suddenly everything I thought was safe wasn't. I wasn't angry, not yet, because heartbreak doesn't start as rage, it starts as silence, and in that silence, I made a decision. If Richard Mitchell could walk away from 45 years of my life, then I could walk right through the fire he left behind and come out with everything he thought he'd stolen from me. He left me for someone younger. But what he didn't know is that I'd just found something too. $3.7 million he thought he'd hidden. And when I was done, even my divorce lawyer said, "It's the cleanest case I've ever seen." My name is Diane Mitchell, and this is my story. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? Because there's something powerful about knowing you're not the only one who's had to start over. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Diane Mitchell, and if you'd told me a year ago that my life would fall apart because of a single sheet of notebook paper, I would have laughed in your face. But here I am, 68 years old, 45 years of marriage behind me, and one note that changed everything. It happened 6 months ago, on a Tuesday morning in March. I remember because Tuesdays were our grocery days. That morning felt like any other. Quiet, safe, and predictable in the way long marriages usually are. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen. Sunlight spilled through the window, catching on the curtains I'd ironed the day before. Richard's reading glasses were on the table, next to the crossword puzzle he'd left unfinished. His cup was still in the sink, half-rinsed, like always. But Richard wasn't there. At first I thought he'd gone out for his morning walk. He liked to leave before the neighborhood got noisy. But then I saw it, a folded piece of notebook paper, weighed down by the salt shaker. It wasn't a grocery list. It wasn't a reminder. I don't know why, but before I even opened it, my hands started shaking. There's this strange thing that happens when your body knows the truth before your brain can accept it. A heaviness in your stomach, a quiet ringing in your ears, like your entire nervous system is trying to warn you. Brace yourself. The note was short, 23 words. Diane, I found someone who makes me feel young again. I need to live the rest of my life on my own terms. Don't try to call me. Richard. That was it. No conversation, no warning, no explanation after 45 years together, just a note. And silence. I remember sitting down at that table, staring at nothing for what felt like hours. The coffee maker beeped because I'd forgotten to turn it off. The neighbor's dog barked. A car drove past. Life just kept moving. But mine had stopped. It's strange how the world doesn't pause for heartbreak, how everything looks exactly the same while you're falling apart inside. The walls, the furniture, the same quiet morning light. All of it becomes unbearable because it used to be part of a life that doesn't exist anymore. When I finally stood up, my knees felt weak. I walked into the living room, looked around, and realized how much of Richard was still there. His shoes by the door, his jacket on the chair, his cologne still hanging faintly in the air. It felt like he'd evaporated, leaving only the shape of himself behind. I didn't cry right away. Not that day. Shock has this way of protecting you, wrapping you in numbness until the pain is ready to land. That night, I sat in bed staring at the ceiling. His side of the bed looked untouched. The dent from his pillow was still there, and all I could think about was the way he'd signed that note. Don't try to call me. It wasn't just goodbye, it was final, cruel, like I was some inconvenience to be disposed of neatly, without conversation, without mess. The first week passed in a blur. I don't even remember eating. My daughter Sarah came over when she couldn't reach her dad's phone. I handed her the note. She read it once, then again. And then she cried harder than I did. My son Michael, ever the protector, wanted to go talk to him, as he put it. And my youngest, Jennifer, She just kept whispering, "Why would he do this, Mom? Why would he leave after everything?" I didn't have an answer. I still don't. The hardest part wasn't the note. It wasn't even the betrayal. It was watching my children, grown adults now, realize that the man they'd looked up to their entire lives was capable of walking away without a backward glance. 5 days later, Richard's lawyer called. Her name was Patricia Thornburg, a voice as cold as glass and twice as sharp. She introduced herself politely, told me she represented Richard Mitchell, and that divorce proceedings would begin shortly. She said something about equitable distribution of assets, and assured me I'd be well taken care of. Well taken care of, like I was a dog being rehomed. After she hung up, I sat in the dark for hours, turning those words over in my head. Equitable distribution. Taken care of. All so neat, so legal, so emotionless. The language people use when they want to take everything from you while pretending they're being kind. That night, I lay in our bed, my bed now, I suppose, and thought about the house. We'd bought it in 1998. We'd painted the kitchen together, argued over tile samples, laughed about how bad we both were at DIY. He'd built the deck with his own hands the summer our youngest graduated. We'd had barbecues, birthdays, even a small wedding reception for our daughter out there. That deck had seen our whole life, and he'd just walked away from it, from me, from everything. But there was something else that stuck with me that night. Something about Patricia's tone. That little inflection when she said, "You'll be well taken care of." It wasn't reassurance. It was condescension. A smug certainty that told me she knew something I didn't. That's when I started to wonder. We weren't poor, but we weren't rich either. At least, that's what I'd always believed. We had a nice house, good cars, a few retirement accounts. I was a teacher for 40 years. Richard had worked in commercial real estate. We lived comfortably, but modestly. So why did his lawyer sound so damn sure of herself? What did she mean by taken care of? I didn't sleep that night. And around 2 a.m., I got up, walked to Richard's home office, and turned on the desk lamp. The air in that room was thick with him, the scent of cologne, old paper, and faint cigar smoke he thought I didn't know about. His world, his sanctuary. I'd always respected that. He handled business, I handled the house. That was our rhythm. That's how it had always been. Until that night. The first thing I saw were the tax returns, neatly filed, labeled 7 years' worth, exactly as the IRS recommends. I pulled them out, one by one, and spread them across the desk. Looking at them made my head spin. Numbers, forms, schedules, things I'd never paid attention to. I'd always just signed wherever he told me, but this time I looked, really looked. Everything looked normal. Joint income, retirement income, nothing unusual. Maybe $90,000 a year. That sounded about right. But then, on Schedule B, under interest and dividends, I saw something. A line that said, "Foreign account. See statement." The amount was small, $840. But that phrase hit me like a slap. Foreign account. We'd never had one. We'd barely traveled outside the U.S. except once to Canada. Richard had always said he trusted American banks and American hands. So why the hell did we have income from a foreign account? I tore through the folders looking for the statement. Nothing. No mention. No paperwork. Every normal bank statement was there, the local credit union, our Fidelity investments, but no foreign account. That meant one thing. He was hiding something. My pulse was racing when I checked his desk drawers. The top one was a mess of pens, paper clips, and receipts. The second had property listings, permits, contractor bids, nothing unusual. The bottom drawer, though, it was locked. And that stopped me cold. In 45 years of marriage, I'd never noticed that drawer had a lock. Or maybe I had and never cared. Why would I? We trusted each other. Or at least, I trusted him. I searched for a key, checking under the desk pad, behind picture frames, inside the pencil cup. Nothing. Then I remembered the little wooden box on his bookshelf. He used to keep cufflinks in it, tie clips, old coins. I pulled it down. Under a pair of cufflinks I'd given him for our 30th anniversary. There it was. A tiny brass key. My hands were trembling when I slid it into the lock. The drawer clicked open. Inside were 3 folders and a leather-bound notebook. The first folder was labeled Cayman. Inside, printed bank statements from First Caribbean International Bank. Account holder, Richard Mitchell. Balance, $1,207,392. My vision blurred for a second. I thought maybe I'd read it wrong. I blinked, looked again. No mistake. Over $1 million. I opened the second folder. Switzerland. Credit Suisse. Balance, $1,932,515. The third folder, Singapore, DBS Bank. Balance, $627,488. I did the math 3 times, my heart hammering so hard I could barely think. $3.7 million. Hidden. Offshore. Completely secret. The leather notebook was worse. Dates, transaction notes, deposits, transfers, 15 years' worth of records, all neatly handwritten. It was a blueprint of deceit. He'd been siphoning money for more than a decade. Every time he sold a property, a percentage disappeared into one of these hidden accounts. He'd been planning this for years, preparing to leave me, building his exit fund while I made dinner and folded laundry, believing we were in this together. When the sun came up, I was still sitting there. Number. Destroyed. But underneath it all, something else had started to grow. A cold, focused clarity. Richard thought he'd gotten away with it. He thought I'd just take what his lawyer offered. The house, a pension, maybe a few savings accounts. He'd walk away rich, and I'd spend my final years in quiet, comfortable humiliation. But he was wrong. He didn't know what I knew, and I wasn't about to let him win. That morning, I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat at the same table where he'd left that note, and whispered out loud for the first time in days. "You took 45 years from me, Richard. But this time, I take everything. And that's exactly what I intended to do." When I said, "I need the best divorce attorney you know," my daughter Sarah didn't hesitate. She sent me a name within 10 minutes, Catherine Chen. "She's ruthless, Mom," Sarah wrote, "but in a good way. She makes men terrified." That was exactly the kind of person I wanted in my corner. Not sentimental, not gentle, not the kind of lawyer who says soothing things while quietly letting you lose. I wanted someone who would look at the facts and treat them like a scalpel. I wanted someone who would do what needed to be done and not be distracted by pity. Catherine's office sat on the 20th floor of a glass tower downtown. When I walked in, the city spread out beneath me. Trains, rooftops, a river like a silver ribbon. Her receptionist led me into a minimalist waiting room with art that cost more than my house. I almost smiled at the absurdity. I'd spent my life in classrooms and PTA meetings. This was a world of sharp lines and sharper people. Catherine came out wearing a dark suit that made her shoulders look like armor. She shook my hand once, solid and decisive, then sat down across from me and asked, "Tell me everything." So I told her. I handed her the folders I'd found in Richard's desk, the bank statements, the ledger, the dates, the transfers, and watched her face while she read. There was no melodrama, no gasp. Just a small lift at the corner of her mouth that felt dangerously like approval. "Where did you get these?" she asked when she finished. "In his office. Bottom drawer, locked." The key was under his cufflink box. I tried to keep my voice steady. He left a note on the counter. Walked out. Catherine nodded, folded the papers with precision, and tapped them against the table like a surgeon testing the blade. "You did the right thing by bringing these to me," she said. "Most people come to me after they've already signed something. You got ahead of it. What can we do?" I asked. My voice sounded foreign in my ears, small and helpless and very unlike the woman who'd taught third graders for 4 decades. "What you do depends on how patient you want to be," she said. "Do you want this done fast and loud? Or slow and surgical?" Her question surprised me. I looked at her. She had a way of asking the real thing, as if it were a small choice between 2 coffees. I realized then how soft and dangerous my life sounded when I tried to pretend it could remain ordinary. "Surgical," I said. I want him to suffer the consequences of lying. But mostly, I want what's mine. Catherine smiled then. A quick, thin smile that didn't feel like warmth. It felt like a promise. Good. We'll make him pay for the lie, not for the hurt. Emotion doesn't win in family court. Facts do. You brought facts over the next few days. What felt like chaos outside took on the tidy order of a legal campaign inside Catherine's office. She explained patiently at first, then with a briskness that made every step feel inevitable, how divorces are a numbers game and how numbers can be gamed. Richard filed a sworn financial disclosure, she said, sliding a copy across the conference table. It states marital assets totaling roughly $850,000, house, pension, some investments. On paper, that looks reasonable for a couple in your position. But what it doesn't show is the $3.7 million you just found. Hiding assets in divorce is illegal. Hiding offshore accounts, that's not just civil. It can invite criminal exposure. She pointed at the ledger, tracing with her finger the path his money took. Property sale here, offshore transfer there, a small rounding error that looked like bookkeeping in one place and like deliberate concealment in another. He set up an escape hatch. He planned this. And when people plan, they leave traces. We follow the traces. Catherine's strategy was a study in quiet ferocity. We would proceed in public with total transparency, file our responses, disclose everything we did know, sign no secret deals, play the role of the spotless spouse with nothing to hide. Then we'd wait for Richard's team to file his disclosures. She expected he would either commit the classic amateur mistake, omit the accounts entirely, or he would include them and try to explain them away with a half-truth. If he omits them, she said, looking at me like a scientist who'd found an interesting specimen, we file a motion for discovery violations and sanctions. Perjury is serious. Judges hate being lied to. The penalty is often a significant financial award to the wronged spouse, and sometimes a referral to federal authorities. If he includes the accounts, then we look for the paper trail that ties them to marital funds. Either way, hiding is his worst move. Her language was efficient and bright with possibility. There was a part of me that hated the thrill it gave me. It felt like feeding a small, satisfying revenge smile that had nothing to do with forgiveness and everything to do with justice. I told her I was ready to wait. We filed our response within a week. Catherine drafted a disclosure that was thorough to the point of obsession. House, retirement accounts, personal items, everything we'd ever jointly owned. We were going to be squeaky clean, right up to the point where we'd show the court the lie. Richard's camp, predictably, filed back. Patricia Thornburg's letter was all professional chill. She asked for reasonable discovery requests and suggested mediation as a first step. In the middle of their attorney profiling, the world carried on with its normal business. But I no longer saw it the same way. In the supermarket, I checked the prices twice and felt faintly amused at how the ads promised security when my entire future had been brokered across 3 different continents. Weeks passed. The next big hearing, a settlement conference, was scheduled 3 months after Richard left. Catherine told me to keep my life as normal as possible. It was good theater for the court if the plaintiff seemed steady, so I went back to the classroom part-time, ran tutoring sessions, drank bad coffee with colleagues, and pretended the house wasn't an evidence repository. Inside, we prepared. Catherine busily requested records from banks, coordinated with forensic accountants, and drafted a paper trail so thorough I felt like we were building a house of documents. There were nights when I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake and picture Richard on a beach somewhere, glass of something cold in his hand, while I counted every penny and planned how to get back what had been taken. Other nights, I'd fall asleep with a book in my lap, thinking about how my teacher's voice had always told kids to check their work twice. Check your work twice, always. The day of the settlement conference, the air in the foyer of Patricia's law firm felt manufactured. Glass so shiny it hurt, flowers so carefully arranged they seemed staged, the hush of people who practiced being important. Richard arrived with an air of calm I recognize now as bravado. He was dressed for a new life, younger clothes, a tan that screamed weekends in places I had never been invited to. He barely looked at me. When he did, his eyes slid off like a sliding glass door. Patricia greeted me with a nod that was only halfway polite. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, "we are prepared to offer you the marital home, the retirement accounts, and a reasonable buyout." She slid a settlement draft across the table, the kind of document that felt like a trap because it looked tidy, like an apology written in fine print. Catherine waited until Patricia finished, then reached into her briefcase like a magician. The moment Catherine placed the 3 folders on the table, the Cayman statements, the Credit Suisse statements, the DBS documents, you could feel the room inhale. Patricia's face did something like a crack. For a second, she was the composed machine that could slice through opposition with language. For a second, she looked like someone who had been handed a live wire. Richard's face changed too, but his shock was paler and shallower. He had been confident, but suddenly his edges looked ragged. "Mrs. Mitchell discovered these," Catherine said, as if reading from an unfortunate script. "We have 3 offshore accounts with a combined balance of roughly $3.7 million. These are assets Mr. Mitchell did not disclose in his sworn financial statement." The mediator on the screen leaned forward. "Mr. Mitchell, are these your accounts?" he asked. The voice from the monitor was calm, but I could hear the tribunal in it. Judges and mediators are trained to hear the smell of deceit from a mile away. Richard's jaw worked. Patricia asked for a recess. In the hallway, Catherine and Patricia argued like 2 boxers circling each other. Patricia's voice had that clipped anger I'd come to know, and Catherine's was slow, controlled, and endlessly patient. I stood by a potted plant and watched 2 worlds collide, public niceties and private desperations. When the lawyers came back in, Patricia's mask had slid back on, but it fit with a crack now. She had no miracle to offer. The accounts existed. Richard's options had narrowed to something very basic: admit and negotiate, or risk court and possible criminal referrals. Catherine's voice was plain and cold. "We can take this to court," she said, eyes on Richard. "We can expose perjury. That will invite IRS scrutiny and possible criminal charges for failing to report offshore income. Or you can accept terms that reflect the full scope of marital assets." Richard's shoulders folded. For the first time in months, I saw fear in him, not the theatrical, messy fear he'd worn at the gala the night before he left, but real animal fear. He mouthed something to Patricia, whose expression hardened. "Please," he said finally, "let's just settle." Catherine slid a counteroffer across the table that read like a judgment wrapped in civility. A significant portion of the offshore accounts transferred to me, a larger share of his pension, immediate transfers, and a permanent monthly income that guaranteed stability. She argued both law and decency in a way that cut off escape routes. "Hiding assets is not a clever tactic," she said. "It's a legal and moral failing. Courts do not reward that." Richard agreed, but not without a fight. A pitiful scramble for dignity that was mainly directed at me. He tried to apologize, his voice small and theatrical. "I never meant to hurt you, Diane." I listened. I let him finish. Then I answered in the same calm I'd been cultivating for weeks. "You did," I said. "You meant to hide what you were doing. You meant to walk away clean." My voice did not shake. "But you miscalculated. You forgot how long we'd lived together. You forgot where you hid the key. The settlement was signed in the next hour." Catherine had not only negotiated an agreement that transferred a large portion of the offshore funds to me, she'd negotiated penalties for omissions and a structure that made sure the money arrived quickly. She did it all with a kind of efficient cruelty that felt like justice. Walking out of the conference room, I realized the world had shifted. The man who had left a note on my kitchen counter with a flippant "don't call me" had just been forced into a corner he hadn't planned for. The letter still sat on my countertops at home like a fossil, a relic of the person he'd pretended to be. But the ledger, the raw, ugly ledger, had turned the tables. That night, the house felt the same. His shoes, his jacket, the faint cigar smell. But when I walked through the rooms, I felt different. I had changed. Too many years of being a wife had given me a certain muscle memory for compromise, but discovering and claiming what was mine had built a new muscle. Ferocity shaped by purpose. People ask what revenge felt like. I didn't feel euphoric. I didn't dance on anyone's graves. What I felt was something closer to reclamation. A slow, steady righting. The humiliation he'd dealt me had been answered not by spite, but by strategy. He had expected tears. He got paperwork. He'd planned to escape our life with money tucked away in offshore havens. Instead, he stepped into a courtroom where the law turned the light on his hiding places. I don't tell this story to glorify courtroom victories. I tell it because for a long time I'd believed endurance and softness were virtues in marriage. I learned that boundaries and truth had their own kind of dignity. I learned that you could be both a woman who loved and a woman who refused to be erased. Catherine sent the wire transfers within 30 days. The accounts that Richard had meant to make invisible became the tool that rebuilt my life. I kept the house but renovated it on my terms. I restarted things I'd stopped believing in, trips with my daughters, volunteering at the women's shelter, and yes, the little things that used to be sacred and now felt sacred because I chose them. The shock didn't vanish. There were nights I still felt hollow, and sometimes the furniture looked too quiet. But then there were days I felt powerful in a way I'd never expected. The legal fight was no salve for all the pain. It didn't erase what his note had felt like, but it provided a reckoning, a practical, undeniable restitution that made the betrayal a matter of record, not just a private wound. If you're following this story and feeling something stir in your chest, anger, fear, relief, don't click away. Hit the like button, leave a comment with where you're watching from, and subscribe if you want to hear the rest. This is the part where the machinery moves. The fallout, the way other people reacted, the quiet ways my life rearranged itself, the part where revenge isn't a scream, but a methodical, calm rearrangement of power. This isn't the end of it. Not even close. There were other turns to come. The whispers Richard tried to spread, the reconciliation offers he sent like sad bills, the way friends took sides, and most of all, the small acts I chose to rebuild myself. In Section 3, I'll tell you about the settlement coming through, the first time the money hit my account, and the small, sharp moments of humiliation that followed Richard like a shadow. I'll tell you how I used what I'd won to shape the life I wanted, not in spite, but in proof. For now, breathe with me. We crossed the line. The ledger was no longer just a secret. It had become a weapon for truth. When I woke up the morning after the settlement conference, it took me a full minute to remember why I could breathe again. The sunlight was coming through the same window it always did. The house was the same. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the clock ticking, the coffee maker that had seen decades of mornings. But the air was different. Lighter, freer. For months, every sound had been soaked in fear. The phone ringing, the mail dropping through the slot, even the wind outside. It had all sounded like bad news. That morning, the silence finally sounded like peace. Catherine called at 9 a.m. sharp. She never wasted time with small talk. "It's done," she said. "Patricia filed the final documents with the court this morning. The judge signed off at 8:47. You're officially divorced, Mrs. Mitchell. The transfer order is in motion. I didn't speak right away." I just listened to her voice, steady, efficient, and for the first time since I'd met her, almost gentle. "You'll see the funds in your account within 48 hours, she added. "And Diane, congratulations. You won." I hung up and stared at the phone for a long time. Won. Such a strange word. As if what I'd gone through had been a game. But in a way, it was a cruel one, played with lies and signatures instead of dice. The irony of it hit me like a wave. Richard had left me to live on his own terms. And now, thanks to his own arrogance, I was the one holding all the cards. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, something I hadn't done alone in years, and sat at the kitchen table. The same table where he'd left that note 6 months earlier. The same table where I'd first opened the drawers that led me to his hidden empire. I whispered, almost laughing, "Well, Richard, looks like your terms just expired." 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a notification. Incoming wire transfer. I opened my banking app and stared. $2,108,000. It didn't look real, just a string of numbers glowing on a tiny screen. But the moment I saw it, I started to cry. Not from greed, not even from victory. From relief, from justice. That money wasn't just money. It was 45 years of unseen labor, of invisible emotional weight, of quiet dinners where he spoke and I nodded. It was compensation for every sacrifice I'd made thinking we were a team. It wasn't revenge. It was restitution. I called Sarah first. She picked up on the first ring. "Mom?" she asked, half asleep. "It's done," I said. "The money came through." There was a pause. Then she whispered, "Good for you, Mom," and I could hear her trying not to cry. Michael called that evening, his voice full of protective pride. "I still can't believe he did that to you," he said. "But I'm proud of you, Mom." "You didn't let him get away with it." Jennifer was quieter. She just said, "Now you can finally rest." Rest. It was such a simple word, but it hit me harder than I expected, because that's what I'd been robbed of for years. Rest, peace, knowing I was safe. I slept that night without waking once. A week later, I heard through mutual friends that Richard and his someone younger, Amber, had gone on a trip to Bali. Apparently the settlement had rattled him, but he'd still bragged about having plenty left. I didn't care. Not yet. Not until I saw what would come next. 3 months passed before I heard the real story. Amber left him. Apparently, when she realized his financial situation wasn't as limitless as she'd imagined, when the condo in Seattle had to be downsized, when the credit cards started declining, she decided she needed to focus on her own healing journey. She left him the same way he'd left me. With a note. Someone told me he was living alone now, trying to freelance consulting work for smaller firms. The same man who used to stride into charity galas with a glass of champagne now sat in coffee shops, staring at his laptop screen, a ghost of who he'd been. I didn't gloat. Not really. Because revenge isn't about watching someone fall. It's about finally standing tall yourself. Still, there was something poetic about it. The man who had mocked me for being boring was now irrelevant. To his firm, to his new lover, to the world that once clapped for him. I, on the other hand, was free. With the settlement complete and the house legally mine, I decided to start over. Not somewhere else, but right here. The first thing I did was tear down the deck he'd built. Every board, every nail. That deck had once been our shared dream, Sunday barbecues, laughter, our kids running barefoot. But now, it was a symbol of his dominance, his showmanship. I hired a crew and told them, I want light. I want air. I want this to feel like mine. When it was done, the backyard looked nothing like the one we'd shared. There was a small garden now, lavender and rosemary, soft colors that caught the sunlight, a single wrought iron bench by the fence. I sat there every morning with coffee and felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Quiet ownership of my own life, no compromises, no pretending, just me. But the quiet didn't last long, because when people fall, they don't do it quietly. Richard started calling. At first, it was polite, a voicemail. "Diane, I'd like to talk." Just talk. "Please call me back." I didn't. A week later, another message. "I think we can figure things out. I'm not asking for much. Maybe we can split the retirement funds differently." I was pressured into the settlement. I deleted it without listening to the rest. By the third message, his tone had changed completely. "Diane, I made a mistake, okay? I shouldn't have done it that way. You know me. I'm not this person. I need your help, my help." The same man who'd left me a note like I was a stranger was now asking for help. I remember standing in my kitchen, staring at my phone, and realizing I didn't even feel anger anymore. Just pity. He'd spent decades building a life of control, and now, for the first time, he had none. He called a few more times before giving up, and with every unanswered call, I felt a piece of my old self coming back. The version of me that used to matter, the woman buried under 45 years of compromise. That summer, I took my daughters on a trip to Italy. It was something I'd always dreamed of but never done. Richard used to say, "Europe's overrated. Why travel when you can relax at home?" I used to believe him. Now I understood why he never wanted me to go. He didn't want me to see how big the world was without him in it. We walked through Florence, Venice, Rome. My daughters laughed, took photos, bought wine and trinkets, and for the first time in a long time, I laughed too. Not the polite, quiet laugh of a woman keeping peace, a full, unrestrained, belly-deep laugh that startled even me. Sarah caught me smiling one evening and said, "You look lighter, Mom." I told her, "Because I am." When we got back to Portland, I knew I couldn't just sit around with my settlement money and house. I needed purpose. So I started volunteering at a women's legal clinic downtown, a place where women could come if they were being cheated out of their rights during divorce. On my first day, I sat across from a woman named Helen. She was trembling, eyes red from crying. Her husband had left her for a younger co-worker, claimed they didn't have any real assets, and offered her a pitiful sum to move on. I listened, and when she was done, I leaned forward and said, "Have you checked his office drawers?" She looked at me, confused. "His drawers?" "Yes," I said softly. "Start there." That moment, watching a flicker of hope spark in her eyes, felt better than any dollar I'd ever earned. Over time, I became the woman other women whispered about at the clinic. The teacher who found the millions. The quiet lady who could tell you exactly where your husband might hide things and how to handle it with dignity. Catherine called me once after hearing about my volunteering. "I hear you're building your own little army," she joked. I told her, "No, just helping women find the keys to their own locked drawers." One night, months later, I was sitting in my garden when I saw headlights on the street. A car idled there for a long moment. Then it drove away. I knew it was him, Richard. I didn't call the police. I didn't even move. I just sat there, sipping my tea, watching the dark road. He could watch all he wanted. The house was mine now. The life was mine. And the silence that used to feel suffocating now felt like victory. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's just living so well that your absence from their story becomes their punishment. That fall, the first leaves turned gold outside my window. I'd been divorced for 6 months, exactly when I got an email from Catherine. Subject line, "Tax case closed." I opened it. The IRS had officially concluded their audit of Richard's offshore accounts. He'd been fined heavily. 70% of what he had left, gone. My coffee went cold in my hand, not because I cared, but because I realized something. Every lie eventually costs more than the truth ever would. And in that moment, I understood what freedom really was. Not wealth, not revenge, just the absence of fear. If you're listening to this right now, wherever you are, maybe in your kitchen or driving home from work, I want you to remember something. You can lose everything and still win. You can be broken open and still find your power inside the pieces. You can rebuild. You can rise. Because I did. My name is Diane Mitchell, and 6 months after my husband left me for someone younger, I became richer and freer than I had ever been in my entire life. And when people ask if I ever got closure, I tell them, no, I got justice. I once read that silence can destroy a man faster than anger. I didn't understand what that meant until the day Richard Mitchell became silent history. It started with a rumor. I was grocery shopping when I overheard 2 women near the produce aisle. "Heard about Richard Mitchell? The developer? Lost his biggest contracts, poor guy." Their voices were casual, like they were talking about the weather. But to me, it sounded like justice whispering through the air vents of the world. That evening, I Googled his company name, Mitchell and Grant Real Estate Development. The first headline that popped up read, "Mitchell Firm Faces IRS Investigation Over Unreported Offshore Accounts." I didn't even have to click the article to know what it was about. The audit Catherine had warned him about had arrived. The man who used to boast that he could outsmart the system had finally met one he couldn't charm or cheat, and this time no one was clapping for him. The more I read, the more it unfolded like a slow-motion collapse. The IRS froze his assets pending investigation. His investors withdrew funding. His company's stock, A small private fund he'd started years ago tanked overnight. He was ordered to produce 15 years of records within 30 days, or face formal charges. Richard had built his reputation on being the man who could make money appear from thin air. Now the only thing disappearing was his credibility. I heard from Michael, my son, that Richard tried to call him too. Michael didn't answer. "Mom," he told me later, "he's sorry now, but not for what he did." Just for getting caught, I didn't say anything. Because Michael was right. Men like Richard only feel shame when the mirror cracks. Never before. By winter, he'd lost his downtown office. The firm dissolved quietly. His partners distanced themselves. I heard he'd started consulting out of his condo, the one he'd bought for himself and Amber. Except Amber was gone now, too. She'd packed her things and left him 3 months after the settlement, right after the audit hit the news. Someone said she took his last credit card and maxed it out on a yoga retreat in Costa Rica before blocking his number. There's poetry in that, don't you think? Poetic symmetry, the kind that writes itself when karma finally takes over. He tried to sell the condo, but the market wasn't kind. In desperation, he moved back into the old lake house he'd built before we were married. A place I hadn't thought about in decades, full of mildew and ghosts. And that's where he stayed. Alone. One evening in January around dusk, I was sitting in my garden with a blanket and tea when the phone rang. The caller ID said, "Unknown." Something told me to pick up. "Diane?" His voice was hoarse, small. For a moment I almost didn't recognize it. "Yes," I said. There was a long silence. I could hear him breathing. "They froze everything," he finally said. I can't even pay the lawyers." He sounded desperate, broken, like a man who had spent his whole life rehearsing confidence and suddenly forgot his lines. "I don't know what you expect me to say," I replied. "I made mistakes," he said, "big ones. I thought I could fix it all before you ever found out. But when you did—" He paused, his breath catching. "You were always smarter than me, weren't you?" That made me laugh quietly. Because all those years, he'd made me feel small, as if my intelligence was a hobby compared to his career. Now he was finally seeing the truth. Too late to use it. "I wasn't smarter, Richard," I said softly. "I was honest." That's the difference. He didn't respond. Just a faint sniffle on the other end, like he might have been crying. Then, "Do you ever think about me?" I looked out at the sky, the stars just starting to show. "Sometimes," I said. "Mostly when I'm grateful." "For what?" "For what you taught me," I said. "How to stop underestimating myself." Then I hung up. He never called again. 2 months later, I got a letter from the bank, official-looking envelope, my name typed neatly in the corner. Inside was a notice. Richard had defaulted on his mortgage. The lake house was being foreclosed. I didn't know whether to feel pity or peace, maybe both. Because here's what no one tells you about revenge. It doesn't taste like fire. It tastes like quiet air after a long storm, like a window opening after years of breathing someone else's smoke. Spring came early that year. I planted roses along the edge of my yard, red, yellow, pink. Each one was named after a word I'd learned to reclaim: strength, patience, freedom. When I watered them each morning, I'd think about the locked drawer, the hidden ledgers, the years of silence, all the secrets that had been buried under polite smiles and perfectly trimmed lawns. And I realized something. My story wasn't really about Richard. It was about every woman who has ever been told to wait quietly, to endure, to trust a man's word more than her own instincts. It was about breaking that silence. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at the women's legal clinic downtown, the same place I'd started volunteering. They called it Reclaiming Power After Betrayal. I didn't want to speak at first. But then I thought about all the Helens and Sarahs and Jessicas I'd met in those counseling rooms, women with trembling hands and burning eyes who just needed to hear one thing, that it's okay to fight back. So I stood in front of 50 women that night, microphone trembling in my hand, and told them the truth. My husband didn't just leave me, I said. He underestimated me. He built a life on the idea that I'd never look behind the curtain. But one night, I did, and what I found changed everything. The room was silent, not the silence of indifference, the silence of recognition. I told them about the drawer, about the ledger, about Catherine Chen's calm precision, and the day the transfer came through, but most of all, I told them about the moment after. The moment I sat in my kitchen and realized I no longer needed anyone's permission to feel powerful. Sometimes, I said, the justice you're waiting for isn't loud. It's not a gavel or a headline. Sometimes it's just you, living well after someone else's betrayal. When I finished, the women stood and clapped, not because of what I'd done, but because they saw themselves in me. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. I was heard. That night, when I came home, the porch light flickered as I walked in. I stood in the doorway and looked around. The clean walls, the smell of coffee and wood polish, the faint hum of my new life. On the kitchen counter, right where Richard's note had once been, I placed a small brass key, the same key that had opened his locked drawer, a reminder that no secret stays buried forever. A symbol of what truth, quiet, patient, unstoppable truth, can do. And as I turned off the light and walked upstairs, I whispered something I hadn't said in years. Thank you, Diane. Because sometimes you have to thank yourself for surviving. If you're still listening right now, if this story touched something in you, maybe anger, maybe hope, do one thing for me. Hit the like button. Because every single tap tells me someone else out there understands what it feels like to rise after being broken. Subscribe for more true stories like mine, quiet revenge, real courage, and the kind of justice you don't see in movies but feel in your bones. And tell me, in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? Because somewhere out there, another woman is sitting in her kitchen, staring at a note that changed everything, and maybe, just maybe, your story will help her find her key too. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I stopped counting days. There was a time when I used to wake up and mentally mark the calendar. 1 week since he left, 1 month since the court hearing, 3 months since the settlement. But somewhere along the line, those milestones stopped feeling like wounds and started feeling like distance, the kind that means safety. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. The air didn't feel heavy. The ghosts had finally left with him. I started waking up early again, something I hadn't done since my teaching days. I'd make coffee, open the curtains, and let the sunlight pour in. Every morning looked new. I began writing, not a book, not a journal, just letters to myself. Letters from the woman I was to the woman I was becoming. The first one said, "You survived what was meant to break you." The second, "Don't apologize for healing." Some mornings I would read them aloud, softly, like affirmations, because I needed to hear my own voice again. For too many years, my voice had existed only in response to his. One afternoon, while cleaning the storage room, I found an old photo album, our first house, our first car, our first Christmas tree. For a second, I hesitated. My hands trembled over the cover. I almost threw it away, but something inside stopped me. I sat down and opened it. There we were, young, broke, smiling, believing, 2 people with no idea of what the future would demand from them, and for the first time, I didn't feel pain looking at his face. I just felt gratitude for the lessons, for the years that shaped me, even for the betrayal that set me free. Because love isn't always meant to last. Sometimes it's meant to teach you what love should never look like again. That spring, I decided to travel alone. It wasn't dramatic, no grand announcements, no one waiting at the airport. Just me, a small suitcase, and a quiet determination to see the world on my terms. I went to Santorini. For years, I'd seen those white houses and blue domes in magazines and thought, maybe one day. Now, one day had become today. On the second morning there, I stood on the cliff at sunrise. the same kind of sunrise Richard used to sleep through while I made breakfast. The sky turned from silver to pink to gold, and as the sun broke over the horizon, I whispered, "This is mine." It wasn't a declaration to the world. It was a promise to myself. When I got back home, I started teaching again, not in a classroom, but through workshops at the Women's Center. We called it the Locked Drawer Project. Every woman who came in brought a story, a fear, a question, and sometimes a secret she was ready to face. We helped them find answers, practical, emotional, financial. And I watched something beautiful happen. Women who walked in broken started walking out taller. That's when I realized my life wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding, reclaiming, restoring faith in something deeper than marriage or money, in themselves. One evening after a workshop, a woman approached me. She was maybe 40, soft-spoken, eyes tired but kind. She said, "I listened to your story on YouTube. That's how I found this place." I smiled. "You did?" She nodded. "I thought I was alone until I heard your voice. The part where you said, 'You can lose everything and still win.' That saved me." Her eyes filled with tears, and she whispered, "Thank you." I hugged her. And as she walked away, I thought, that's the real justice. Not the money, not the settlement, but knowing your pain became someone else's map out of theirs. By winter, my life had taken on a new rhythm. Mornings in the garden, afternoons at the center, evenings with my children and grandchildren when they visited. Sometimes, when the little ones ran through the house laughing, I'd catch myself smiling, the same smile I used to wear before the years hardened me. Sarah once said, "Mom, it's like you came back to life." And I told her, "No, honey. I just stopped living for someone else." Every so often, a letter still comes for Richard. Old bills, forgotten mail, legal notices. I forward them unopened, no bitterness attached. He's part of another life now, one that taught me everything I needed to know. I haven't heard from him in nearly a year, but sometimes when it rains and the house gets quiet, I can almost hear his voice, not out of longing, just memory, the kind that reminds you where you've been and why you'll never go back. 6 months ago, I stood in a courtroom, officially ending a 45-year marriage. Today, I stand in the doorway of my own home, my life, my name, my peace, intact. I didn't get even. I got free. And that, I've learned, is the best kind of revenge there is. If you've stayed with me till now, thank you. If my story touched something in you, if you've ever felt betrayed, unseen, or underestimated, hit the like button right now. It tells me you understand what it means to rise quietly. Leave a comment and tell me. Where are you listening from? Because healing feels a little easier when you realize you're not alone. And if you believe that justice doesn't always need a courtroom, subscribe to this channel, because more stories like this one are coming, real, raw, and quietly powerful.